Hello again, and welcome to Dappledark Studios. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create this track from scratch.
Say something.
I hope you found that pretty cool. I created this using a simple loop consisting of just a couple of bars, and in this video I will take you through the composition process that enabled me to add many of the variations to keep things interesting for the listener. I produced this video using some of the features we introduced in version 2. These include a new drum machine, FM synth and sampler, together with a general purpose player that can integrate all these elements to enable you to perform intuitively over your loops. This process relies quite heavily on the sequencer, slicer and also the various effects racks, which I introduced in an earlier video. I will include the link to that video in the description below, which you may wish to check out at some point. Once you've signed up, you should find the composer link on the top menu. You can follow all the steps in this video using the trial edition. Once you've launched the composer, you can select the default ultralight template using this link. If you need to reload this template to reset things during your session, you can locate it at the end of your templates list. Here. Okay, so how do we go from this to this?
Say something.
Once you've loaded the template, you can set the BPM using this icon here. I'm also going to change the name to Freedom. Those of you who are familiar with the composer will know that it slices audio samples and arranges those samples in the composer to create a song. In version 2, we have created loads of new ways to enable you to create new samples. In EDM tunes, the drums play a vital part, and I'm going to start with the drummer. This is a sample-based drum machine, which you can tailor. So here's the basic 4-to-the-floor pattern. you may notice, this is slightly different to the part of the song you heard earlier. That's mainly down to the kick drums, which are pretty vital in EDM. I took the stock sounds and played around with the kick drum for a bit. There are different ways you can load samples into your drums. You can launch the player from different parts of the studio. Everywhere where you see this musical note symbol. Here I can try and adapt and shape the sound. And simply replace it like this. I messed around for a while, and I really wanted a kick to cut through the deep bass line I'm going to create. And in the end, I simply sampled an old tune of mine. I simply loaded the complete track and took the kick drum from right at the start. It's not the cleanest, but it's good enough for this demo. I then simply replaced the whole drum sample with my kick. Remember, you want to keep these samples short, especially if you have a machine with restricted amounts of RAM. So here's my kick drum, and hopefully you can notice the difference. I still wanted to layer this and simply replicated the kick on both kick channels. Shaped and filtered the kicks till I achieved this arrangement. Hopefully you notice the way this kick cuts through the tech kick. Actually, it's no longer a deep kick, probably rename it to soft kick. So here's my loop. Now what can I do with it? I have 4 categories of samples, and I'm going to split this loop into different layers. If you have a loop that's all compacted into a single track, then don't worry. I'll be producing another video that will focus on some of the composer's clever filtering mechanisms that can still enable you to create quite amazing tunes. Since we're creating this from scratch, I have the opportunity to separate these layers. So firstly, I'm going to package up the beats, which can be used for all sorts of things, such as a trigger for sidechaining, for example. I will write that to the drum sample. I'm also going to package up the basic 4 to the floor section. I would also merge this to the drum sample. Remember, we are just collecting interesting sounds, and we will slice and dice these later. I'll package up the full loop, which we call the mixdown. Then I'm going to package up the synth element separately and write this to the synth sample, since that's where it will most likely reside. Cool. So a quick recap of what we've just done, and the best way to illustrate that is to have a look at the various samples. Those of you familiar with the composer will know that it slices audio samples and arranges those samples in the composer to create a song. In version 2, we have created loads of new ways to enable you to create new samples. Let's dissect this composition and look at the different elements. The drum sample consists of just 2 slices. The synth sample contains a main slice, which we'll create later by simply performing and recording on the effects racks. I've simply sliced that recorded part of the sample and designated it as the main slice. From that slice, I've used loads of sub-slices for variations, builds and drops. I've also created a cool overlaid clap effect from the same part of the sample. Remember, the slicer slices away at real time as you move the wave around. These transient slices, which are the numbered ones, will alter and created for us to use based on the slicer setting. So here, I've simply created a slice called main to enable me to reset the slicer to the position that will create the transient numbered slices if I ever forget the slicer position or accidentally displace it. One of the things I haven't mentioned yet is this little eye symbol here. What is it? It enables you to ramp your pattern. These red colored slices have some info of interest, in this case a ramp param. Cool, right? The synth rider slice here was bounced from the synth drum on the drummer. I simply picked a small subsection provided by the slicer, in this case an 1/8 of a bar. The slicer is helping us along and creating loads of assets for us to use to overlay, layer, ramp up, down and transition between sections of our song. We can simply try different slices to see what works. I've also used some common vocal slices here for illustration, but use whatever works for your composition.
Say something. Say something. Say something. Say something. Just anything. Drop it. Say something. Drop it.
Believe it or not, that's me on the mic. It's crazy what you can do with some pitching and effects applied. Hard to believe, but I ended up with a single slice for my drop, which I bounced from the drummer earlier. In version 2, we have a general purpose player that can be used by the drummer, the synth, and an integrated sampler. Later, I will show you how to create this bassline, which also forms part of the melody, using the sampler to play notes based on one of the drum samples. The second breakdown is similar to the first, and we'll discuss the percussive overlaid claps in more detail later. There are some interesting things on the second drop and outro though, so let's have a look at those. As you can see, we have again leveraged some of the slices the slicer has created for us, and simply ramping these for effect. You'll notice that we are layering different slices here, some from the same sample and some from across different samples. There is the potential therefore to encounter beat mismatches and phase issues. You may want that effect sometimes, but here I'll show you some tricks you can use to beat match. Again, there's a very detailed section in the video that I mentioned at the start of this one that covers beat matching in depth. So here, my mixdown slice and beat slice are layered and share the same drum beats since they were both bounced from the drummer. I've leveled the volumes of the two channels to highlight any overlaps more easily. You can use this song beat utility to get a good idea as to how close you are. This beat is electronically generated and true to the BPM of the song and can be useful in most scenarios. When moving from one slice to another in the same sample, like in the intro between the main drum slice and the beat slice, they can quite easily be matched. But where you have slices stacked, like the mixdown and the drum slices in the drop, any imperfections can be more noticeable and lead to phasing issues. You may want that effect or filter some of it out. However, the thing I do is simply lock one of the slices as reference and slide others around till you get the desired effect. Sort of beat matching on site, if you will. Let's try and layer two drum slices. One contains just our kick, which is the beat slice. This slice is locked in position. We can then move our wave around to beat match the 4 to the floor section, including our claps and hats, until we find the desired effect. If we want, we can create different permutations to add variations. Since we're messing around with slices, a useful point to highlight is the delete option for fade slices. When a slice is used in your song, the delete icon disappears. To delete these slices, simply replace the patterns in the song where they are used with something else, and your delete icon for the slice should become available again. This is simply to prevent you accidentally corrupting your composition. Remember, we can bring this player up from anywhere in the studio where you see this note symbol. We used it earlier to sample our drum sounds. Now we are going to use it to play some notes. I'm simply going to take the synth sound from the drummer and play something. We can record pretty much anything that you play in the composer and bounce that as a usable sample. But the player lets you separate the MIDI notes to enable you to create layers of sounds over any loop on the master sequencer. So here, I'm going to loop over my main drum loop and record a few notes. As you record notes, you'll see this note eraser light up. You will also see the notes highlighted in your loop on the master sequencer. A bit like recording vocals, you can keep performing until you're happy with a version that fits your loop. You can also create and bounce as many examples as you need. You can also shape these notes using automation here. If you have any automations, you will also see the second eraser light up. If I change my loop selection, you will notice that the overlaid player notes are only available within the loop where they were recorded. And these overlaid notes will only play if you use the player to trigger the sequencer, or until you've bounced and sequenced the slices onto your composition, of course. When you're happy, you can bounce this loop as a separate layer. This is what I did to produce the loop in the synth sample. I've mentioned this slice called claps before. I've used it as a percussion element, as well as for short rises and variations via the use of its subslices. So where did this sample come from? The composer will play pretty much anything you play via master out. Here, I simply looped the main drop and recorded the filtered sound using this effects filter. It was pretty easy to do. Then I simply sliced and loaded it onto the song structure. Finally, I was completely undecided whether to sidechain the bassline. I decided not to go with it in the end, because the bassline actually adds to the depth and also contributes to the melody. Just to illustrate my thought process though, and show what's actually going on, let's put a busy pattern in and hear the effects. right? Hopefully you heard the permutations with the whole unit off, the variations with just a standard compressor and the sidechain mode. In version 2, we've introduced a cool new FM synth. Don't let its diminutive look and feel fool you. Together with your player, you can create some awesome new sounds. I played around with it to generate a different bassline initially and tried to record it as a layer of MIDI notes using the player, and also as some steps on the drummer. Please excuse the out-of-tune sounds, but I just wanted to include these experimental sections just to show you the creative process I went through, and hopefully inspire you to try some different things. Another cool new unit we've introduced in version 2 is the padlock unit. It conveniently gathers all your fave slices, up to 64 in total. You can then perform and record on these pads to produce variations and different melodies in your tracks. The padlock also acts as a source of slice samples for the drummer. The effects racks are arranged to help you create groups of layers that can be controlled together. I have kept the use of effects to a minimum with this composition. I've used a filter for the drop, simply to add variation here. There's also some reverb on the synths, which includes one of the vocal channels, just to make things interesting in different parts.
Say something. Say something. Say something. Say something.
The master effects rack is a different story, of course. So let's explore that in a bit more detail in the next section on mastering.
Say something.
Now, what I've actually been doing is cheating a little bit during the editing process, because I've had to turn up the volume in certain sections of the track so you can hear what's actually going on. But this is what it actually sounds like. See this icon up here? It can provide some guidance of whereabouts you need to be sonically. So let's open up this master rack. This is a separate art form of its own, but I'll have a crack at trying to polish up this tune.
Say something.
So a little bit of EQ first, followed by some subtle compression. You really need this to light up, otherwise you're not really gluing much together. A tiny bit of reverb and some stereo imaging. A note on the imager here. At halfway point, it's not really doing much. It's mono below that and full stereo above. So somewhere up here. Finally, some limiting. Just make sure no red clip lights emerge anywhere in the mixer or any of the effects racks. You can of course go back to your drum pattern as well as the player to adjust things, but hopefully this provides some idea of what's possible. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked what you saw, why not subscribe and give the composer a try. You can try pretty much everything you saw using the trial edition. I'll play you out with the rest of this tune. You should see some additional links to the other video I mentioned earlier right at the end of this video. Keep safe until the next time. Bye.
Say something.